Okay, then I think we're going to be getting started now. My name is Anherad Lang. Many of you, I think, know me by now. I see many familiar names in the list here in the virtual room, but I'll just briefly introduce myself. As I said, my name is Anherad Lang, and I'm Executive Director of PHAP, which stands for the International Association of Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection. I see many of our members are here in the virtual room today. Very glad to have you with us, and glad to have many guests as well for what promises to be a very interesting discussion as part of our major series of online discussion consultation events linked to the World Humanitarian Summit process. So just a brief word about where this does fit into the whole process. So we've been, as PHAP, involved for a number of months now in supporting the World Humanitarian Summit consultation process, which has really aimed to be a far more inclusive, broad-based, really wide-reaching consultation process than anything seen before in the humanitarian sector. So it's a very exciting opportunity, I think, for many stakeholders in the sector, and it was certainly an exciting opportunity for us as an individual-based professional association with a really global network of people like yourselves working in the sector to find a way to get involved and really facilitate a number of the discussions linked to the summit process and see what we can do as an association and together with your help participating in the discussion to really move things forward in a frank and constructive way. So as many of you will know, the summit process is structured around 8 different regions of the world and also across 4 themes. Now, 2 of the regional consultations have already taken place over the last few months. The first was the regional consultation for West and Central Africa. The second was for North and Southeast Asia. And in each of these regions, all 4 themes were addressed. Today, we are on the verge of seeing the launch of the regional consultation in the Eastern and Southern Africa region, which is very exciting. And today specifically, we're looking at the theme of humanitarian effectiveness and what are, as we go into the on-site major event next week, what are the regional priorities in terms of humanitarian effectiveness in the Eastern and Southern Africa region. So of course, as a global community, we've seen the priorities coming out of the first 2 regions, West Africa, North and Southeast Asia, and now is the time to really dig into what does the humanitarian effectiveness mean, what are the challenges on the ground, and what needs to happen in the next phase of reform or improvement of the humanitarian system in the realm of effectiveness. So we have with us today, as you can see, an excellent group of participants, which is very exciting, and we look forward to having all of you actively participating in the discussion. We're also really pleased to have with us a number of guest speakers who I'll be introducing along the way today. We've asked each one of them to give a brief presentation between 5 and 7 minutes or so on their own perspectives on the question of effectiveness and trying to bring in some examples from their own work in the region. And they're really coming from across the region under consideration today and also from a variety of different organizations. So we hope that we'll have a good variety of perspectives in the discussion to really have a lively interaction going. So before we get started with introducing our first guest speaker, I'm going to very quickly run through a few tips regarding the use of this online platform, because I can see that we do have several people with us today for the first time. So I'll quickly run through, first of all, the way that you can ask questions during the event. And we really encourage all of you, anything that's crossing your mind, a question for one of our speakers, a general question or a comment or a point that you would like to make, please do put that in, just as you're thinking of it, into the Ask a Question box. You can see the screenshot there in front of you on the screen. This will come back to us in our studio here so we can gather those questions up, and we'll use them in the Q&A in the second half of the event today. Now, I think you have all noticed now also our polls that we have appear on the screen throughout the event. So right now we have one question on the screen: have you participated in one of these events with us before? And I see that many of you have answered already. Please, those of you who haven't, do click the yes or no. And the results are shifting as they come in, but at this point it looks like it's about 50-50, maybe 60-40. So we do have a lot of new people in the room today, and a really warm welcome again to all of you. Great to have you with us. We'll be posting polls throughout the event and linking the poll questions to what's being presented by our guest speakers so that we can really keep a dynamic discussion going in the room. So please do keep an eye out for those throughout the event. We also, as usual, will be producing a live Twitter feed from the discussion. So if you're an avid Twitter user, do look for us at PHAP Forum using hashtag ReshapeAid for the summit discussions. And also, in case any of you have difficulties with the audio connection today, this does tend to be quite a solid platform, but depending on your internet connection, it is possible that you could run into audio connection problems. In that case, we would recommend that you try using our live streaming service, which we're running through YouTube, and you can access it at the URL that you see in your screen. Although do note, if you go for the live streaming service, you'll only be getting the one-way audio from the events, so you'll be able to follow the discussion, but not being on the live platform, you won't be able to contribute. So if you're able to stay in this Adobe Connect platform with us, all the better. Okay, so we're going to move right into introducing our speakers, and I'm going to introduce them as we go along here. We're going to be beginning with Francis. And Francis, it's really great to have you with us. So you've been an active contributor as a participant in a number of the events that we've organized over the last weeks and months around the summit. Francis is Regional Child Protection Coordinator with Save the Children for both the West and East Africa regions. And I know from our previous discussions does have a number of interesting points to make on the theme of effectiveness and some examples as well from his work. So Francis, it's great to have you with us, and I'm going to give you the floor right away. And then as we go through the rest of our panel, I'll be introducing each person. So Francis, I can see that getting your slides up on the screen, and we're now connecting our audio, and I'm going to wait for the thumbs up from Marcus, and then I'll give you the floor. Okay, we have a thumbs up. Francis, let's see if we can hear you.
Okay, could you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we hear you well, and you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity once again to appreciate the good work being done by us and the whole team of PHAP in Geneva. Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay, so Francis, we're ready to turn to you for your presentation if you'd like to proceed.
Okay. Thank you. You can hear me now?
Yes, yes, we hear you very well.
Okay. I can see, I can hear a few of us are also talking, but I don't know. Yes. Are we ready now?
Yes, we're ready now. You can go ahead.
Okay. I will once again say thank you very much. Oh, hello, Marcus. There is also some talking. So I don't know. We are talking concurrently. I don't know. Hello, Marcus.
I think you might have perhaps the
Yes.
YouTube or streaming on in the background. You would need to close that so you don't have several audio children at the same time.
The audio, I'm not sure I want.
We can hear you loud and clear. So and there is no other audio. So if you just mute, if you turn off your computer audio, we will be able to hear your presentation loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you very much. So let me also take this opportunity to say thank you very much for the entire team of PHAP for the good work a couple of weeks. As the colleague has said, it has been interesting and providing us with a lot of insight of the future of humanitarian action. I will straightforward go to the presentation. Just sharing with us some of the experiences and looking forward in terms of how the humanitarian agencies and other stakeholders can consolidate their efforts, synergies, and opportunities moving forward in terms of effectiveness of our humanitarian work, in Eastern and Central and Southern Africa. I will start by acknowledging the fact that we have got a lot of priorities put on the table among the humanitarian agencies and also other stakeholders that we work with. And in my view, and also from the experience in these two regions, it's obvious that protection of civilians in emergency and conflict areas, particularly children, is one of the areas that would feature a lot in coming days. And perhaps most agencies are already doing quite a lot of work in that area, both in Southern and East Africa. Secondly, the natural disasters that we have also witnessed in a few spot areas in Eastern Africa might also continue to feature a lot, and maybe humanitarian agencies together with the military, police, and other stakeholders might also find that to be very, very urgent, or rather a priority in terms of humanitarian operation and also planning. But very quickly to the presentation and the task that I have to share with us. One of the things that comes in our mind when we talk about effectiveness, I was just looking at the kind of work we do, the collaboration we have, and a couple of questions were coming in my mind, asking ourselves, do we have coordination structures really in place? Even in circumstances where coordination structures or institutions have existed, are we really planned according to the local context? And you will realize that having examples in this presentation, I have got some examples, even where we plan and we do some analysis on ground to establish the real need of the local people and the communities in regard to humanitarian work. Perhaps one of the things we need to ask ourselves is the interlinkages, the interlinkages between the different components and the sensitivities of the political and security dynamics in those areas perhaps has missed us a lot. Maybe not because of poor planning, but also because of the rapidly changing political and security dynamics in Eastern and Southern Africa. And finally, one of the questions that is lingering in my mind is, do we really learn a lot from the lessons we learn from, or rather from the evaluations that we do on our humanitarian work? And if we do so, how do we share this information so that, because we realize in 21st century, humanitarian workers cannot do their work alone. And perhaps that explains the reasons why in my presentation, I've emphasized three important aspects. The first aspect is the opportunities regarding the youth population in the two regions and the voluntarism. The concept of voluntarism and the practice of the same is very, very visible in these areas. Very invisible, I would say so. And therefore, we are asking ourselves, if we were to tap the opportunities among the youth and also the practice of voluntarism, how then do we contextualize?
Very unfortunately, it seems we may have lost the audio connection with Francis just in the middle of his presentation. So we're going to be looking into that. In the meantime, I think we'll perhaps move on to our next speaker, and then we'll have to return to Francis's presentation.
Humanitarian.
Oh, okay. Yes, no, that's
we
fine.
still
So
there?
Francis, yes, sorry. No, we're still there. Sorry,
Hello?
Francis. You can continue.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I was saying, I was trying to link up the examples we have, you know, in the two regions, the two key trends that we have, the youthful population and the opportunities that we might have missed in the past of using the practice of voluntarism. You know, we need to find a way of linking it to the key environmental dynamics that we have. One of them being the political dynamics and the security dynamics that are very live and very active in Southern and Eastern Africa. I was just looking at the statistics that we have in terms of populations. In East African community alone, we have more than 240 million people. In SADC region, which is covering 15 countries in Southern Africa, it's about 277 million people. In both cases, you'll always find the youthful population is high. The different organizations give us different statistics, but it ranges between 60 to 70% of the youthful population. And therefore, the question we are asking is, how then do we harness this youthful population in terms of encouraging the culture of voluntarism? And we have a number of opportunities. One of them, we have seen a lot of militarization of national institutions in most of countries in the two regions. And therefore, for me, this would mean that the military institutions are becoming more akin to civilization, or rather, they might appreciate the concept of interagency. For me, that would be a very good opportunity.
Okay, we seem to have lost the connection again. We're going to try and bring Francis back. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Okay, Francis, I think back again. Yes? Okay, we'll give you a call.
Yes, can we continue, Marcus?
Yes, we can continue. Very good.
Okay. I was actually mentioning some examples where we have seen a very interesting trend, which is not new, but is in a renewed form. Regionalization in Eastern Africa, where you have a number of activities carried on by peacekeepers, particularly the military and police. And perhaps it is a ripe opportunity for humanitarian agencies to take advantage of that. In East Africa, for instance, we have had exercises like Mashariki exercise, where you know, humanitarian operation plans are developed and shared amongst the participants. In South African region, we have got what we call the Golfinho. Golfinho is an exercise that is putting together the 15 members of the SADC to exercise, not just for military operation, but for peace support operation, which means that the humanitarian agencies have got a great opportunity to participate, to put in their input, to review their evaluations, and participate as well. Like for instance, in East Africa, they have set a date in the month of November to have an exercise in Addis Ababa, where they have invited humanitarian agencies as well to participate and give their contribution on the what they call the command post exercise. These terminologies may sound military, but I can assure you they are not. It is a very multidimensional. For me, it is a great opportunity in 21st century for humanitarian agencies to take that advantage because we realize that we cannot work alone. I mean, a multidimensional approach to this work. And again, some of the challenges that when you look at the trend in the two regions, as much as regionalization is becoming an opportunity, we also realize that the culture of voluntarism is not well developed. As much as many countries are recognizing that youth are important in terms of contributing to, for instance, mitigating the impact of disasters or conflicts, we have not tapped this practice. I know it is very common in countries like Australia. They are very excellent in terms of response. Also in some areas like the Indian Ocean Highlands, in Seychelles, in Comoros, in Madagascar, they're very good in this. But I think Southern and Eastern Africa, it's the right time. They would also cultivate the culture of voluntarism so that we could also move forward. But I think I also wanted to mention that we have some specific case studies or case examples. For instance, in terms of coordination, in Eastern Africa, for instance, Uganda has one of the best coordination centers. And you realize recently when there was an outbreak of Ebola in West Africa, the African Union recommended the head of the center, the coordination center in Uganda, to head the AU convoy on arresting the problem of Ebola in West Africa. So we still have those opportunities, and I think it's the right time that we find a way of reaping them or making use of them. And one of the best way I'm recommending would be in the entire circle of humanitarian planning and delivery. We don't just need to focus on political ends or policy level, but we also need to start to apply a bottom-up strategy in terms of planning, delivery, and evaluation, and reflection. We need to do a lot of reflection. Where we have gone wrong, we make corrections, and I think we shall be upping our game on effectiveness of response. If you allow me, finally, I would share with you some of the examples, or rather, that we have in the two regions, and opportunities in the sense that some of the specific best
Okay, we lost Francis once again, but since we regained him in the past, I think we can regain him again now so that he can finish his presentation.
Yes. Yes. Are we now okay? Yes. Yes.
Yes, very good.
Okay. So as I finalize, I know there are a few issues here and there, technological issues, but I think we can move forward. I just wanted to share with the colleagues some of the best examples that we have in some of the countries in Southern and Eastern Africa that we can build on, and perhaps humanitarian organizations would take that advantage in terms of building structures, developing trust, and making sure that the political environment does not become a stumbling block, but it facilitates our work. One of them is the good example in Kenya. Kenya has had a lead on renewing the National Youth Service, and that's a great opportunity, and it's an achievement that we could as well build on, because then the youth service itself, it simply means that we are harnessing the talents and the available youth that can be used in times of risks or in times of crises or where we have natural disasters. It is something that has been institutionalized in countries other than Kenya. I know in Ethiopia, I know in Uganda, they are also very strong on that. In South African countries, I know South African
Apologies, everyone. We're going to try one more time here. Okay, Francis, are you back?
Are we back?
Yes, we're back. Thank you
Yes,
for your patience. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd given the example of the National Youth Service in Kenya as one of the best examples that perhaps we might want to make. And it's made up, it's an institution, and that means advocacy would require it to be done on how to tap the youth in helping in crisis situations, in disaster, and that can also be replicated in other places. I know the same program works in Ethiopia and also in Uganda. In South African countries, I know South Africa has such a similar thing, but also in Mozambique. Mozambique could also tap from.
Okay, so unfortunately, it seems to be getting a bit worse with the connection there. So Francis, I believe that we were very close to the end of your presentation there. So I think we are going to have to move on. But I hope that you'll be able to come back in the discussion, because I think you were bringing a number of really interesting points. And I know that you have a lot to contribute to the ongoing discussion. So I would suggest now, Francis, that we'll move to the next speaker. So we'll start to hear from Michael next, and then we'll bring you back in a bit later in the event, if that's fine with you.
Okay, thank you. We can as well comment. I can as well comment as we move on. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Francis. So we're going to move on now to our next guest speaker, who is Michael. Michael is Regional Programs Coordinator for the Southern Africa region for the IFRC, International Federation for the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. So Michael, I think we've got you on the line, so we're going to pass you the floor right away, and look forward to your remarks. Michael, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My discussion today will be on humanitarian effectiveness in protracted crises. That is, chronic crises that are cyclical and that, recur often. But before I start, I would just like to say, thank you for having me on. I think it's a great opportunity to highlight some of the issues we've been facing within this region and to highlight some of the, recommendations that we have in terms of, protracted crisis and humanitarian effectiveness. First and foremost, just to distinguish between the saving humanitarian action in conflicts and sudden onset disasters on one hand, and the protracted crisis of chronic food security, urban risk, and cyclical disasters, such as droughts due to the effects of climate change that we see quite often in this region. During conflict situations and sudden onset disasters, effective humanitarian action is mostly a question of timeliness, coordination, quality, and access. And I think over the years we've been getting better at this in terms of how soon after the disaster strike do we have effective aid to the beneficiaries? How are we able to coordinate as a humanitarian family? And what are the qualities and the issues of access that we face? So I think over time we've been getting better at it, but we're still not at the end line yet. In protracted crisis, however, it is really a long haul, and it is really about system strengthening, about mitigation, and about building resilience. As we all know, for the chronic crisis, it's not always easy to raise funding for response to chronic crisis. So what do we do, and how can we get better at it? Long chronic crises are increasingly located in middle-income countries. If you take the issue of Southern Africa, for example, we see that Botswana is a middle-income country, Namibia is a middle-income country. However, the inequality is still there. So although it's a middle-income country, we still see that in the rural areas there are still poverty, there are still people that don't have access to the basic amenities. So how do we make sure that we can provide humanitarian aid to these people? My premise is that we need to invest more in local institutions. We need to invest more in the domestic institutions. We need to see that these domestic institutions are there to be able to provide the services to the most vulnerable people. The reason I say this is basically threefold. First of all, in low-profile crises, chronic food insecurity, for example, most times these issues don't get to the international media. So who is left to deal with it? Who is left to provide services to the most vulnerable people, if not the domestic institutions that we need to strengthen? That's number one. Number two, we need to ensure that domestic institutions become more assertive, and we create the space for them. Because as we see it now, domestic institutions as they are more reliant on international humanitarian assistance and people giving aid from the international world. But without us strengthening them, this is just going to be continue, and it's going to be a cyclical issue. So we need, first and foremost, to strengthen our domestic institutions. And third and most importantly is that domestic institutions and local systems are responsible for addressing domestic humanitarian needs. It's good that we have, the international humanitarian assistance, and I'm not saying that is bad. I'm saying that for the small, protracted crises that don't make the headlines, we need to have systems in place to make sure that we're able to react to those small, protracted crises. And who else is better placed to address those than local institutions? Now, with every local institution, with every organization, there is the issue of transparency, accountability, making sure that they are at the forefront and they're able to provide this assistance to the most vulnerable. So a lot of capacity building is still needed in order for us to be able to get to the desired results. Just to give examples of this region, Namibia, for example, last year they declared an emergency due to low rainfalls in a region called Kunene. The Red Cross was able to launch an appeal, assist them, provide food, provide cash to the beneficiaries. This year again, we see that it's the same situation. There's been low rainfall, there will be bad harvest, and the people will not be able to cope. So in this long and cyclical disasters, how do we ensure that humanitarian assistance is really effective? We've been discussing with the government of Namibia and with other stakeholders in Namibia that we need to learn from other agencies and other sectors. An example of what we're trying to say to them is we can learn from the health sector, for example, where for HIV, TB, and malaria, there's something we have called the country coordinating mechanism, where all the institutions gathered around the table and see that there is adequate funding for the next 3-5 years to be able to deal with those crises. I think for protracted crises, we need to do the same. There's no point in stopping and starting. There's no point in having funds for this year when we know that for the next 2, 3, 4 years the problem will still persist. Why can't we gather together, have a sort of a fund that will be able to deal with this protracted crisis on a more sustainable level. So that's one concrete recommendation we'd like to see how best we can make sure that we engage, different stakeholders to be able to, put funding down to provide services for protracted crisis. And as I said initially, there's no other person to deal with it than, strengthening our domestic organizations, such as the Red Cross, the local organizations, the government within the country, and even the regional bodies, to see that, these issues are adequately addressed, and we can ensure that we are using our money collectively to achieve a certain goal. That's it for me.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Those were really interesting comments, and I think very interesting that you're putting out some concrete proposals as to how systems need to change. I mean, particularly picking up on your last point regarding the structure of funding and how the structure of the support to enable response to protracted or cyclical repeating crises really needs to be re-examined because it's currently not clearly not fitting the needs and also not sufficiently supporting the national institutions, domestic institutions, as you point out, that are on the front lines of response and are really the key to an ongoing response to these repeating or protracted crises. So thank you very much for that intervention. So we're going to be moving on next to see, I believe we have Mvuselelo on the line. We're going to just test that once more. I'm going to wait for a thumbs up here from my colleague. Okay, good. Looks good. Could we try and test Mvuselelo? Could we just check and see if we can hear you?
Yep. Hi, I'm good.
Hi. Very good. Okay, so we do hear you. If you can try and speak up a little bit, I think we'll be just fine. So I'm going to quickly introduce you, and then I'll be passing you the floor. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you go ahead there and offer your presentation.
All right. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be speaking today about the importance of empowering local organizations. So I think I'll be speaking quite similarly to what Michael was talking about, but focusing more on the role of local organizations and communities as well, and how they should be allowed to play a bigger role in humanitarian interventions, especially for sustainability and overall effectiveness. The humanitarian challenges in Eastern and Southern Africa, they varied across a broad spectrum, and I think this means that it needs a wide range of responses as well. So we see problems from drought to floods to conflict, and they all have a different type of response that they require. However, they all have a common factor in that they must, the aim of humanitarian action is to improve the lives of the people who are in need. So I believe that the empowerment of local organizations and the empowerment of communities through coordination of all the agencies involved is key to humanitarian effectiveness. There are a lot of different groups that come together towards humanitarian action. These include governments, donors, NGOs, communities, and even the private sector in some places. And they aim to relieve the immediate stress of the people and to prevent any further harm. And in some cases to build the resilience as well. And they are all guided by the humanitarian principles, which are mainly humanity, impartiality, independence, and neutrality. And also they are usually guided by the universal principles of partnership that the UN and other agencies have agreed to. However, when it comes to implementing these, there are many other forces that dictate, and I've seen some of these chats as well about some of the rules that come along with development and humanitarian funding, and how it's not as simple as just sending it to where it's most needed. And I think sometimes this means that the principles of partnership or the principles of humanitarianism are then interpreted differently by different agencies. But I think the key thing at the end of the day is that local organizations need to be empowered, as Michael was saying, in order to be able to play their role and ensure that the impact at the end is what is expected. There are two main reasons that I think empowerment of local organizations is key. And the first one is that locals have a very good understanding of the context. They have a close tie to the history of the place and the people as well as sometimes the causes and what are possible solutions to the problems that they're facing. And so they need to be taken on board so that they also ensure that all the different sectors of society are accommodated. Francis was talking a lot about youth, and I think that there's a lot of groups within communities such as the elderly and women, children, and the disabled that also need to be considered, because one approach is never adequate for all these different people. And so having being in touch with the locals and the communities and local organizations, which could be anybody from government to local business people to local or traditional leaders, so they can play a big role in making sure that all the needs of the community are adequately met. The second reason why I think local organizations have to be empowered is because they have a close tie to the outcome of the intervention. So firstly, I said they have a close tie to the history of the place, but they also have a close tie to the future of the place. They are very highly invested in that. And so they will play a big role in ensuring that the action is sustainable and that resilience is built. And so empowering the local communities means that the money that's being put into humanitarian action will have a more sustainable impact at the end. So empowerment, I believe, can be done through the intentional inclusion of the locals into all stages of the action. So from planning to implementation to monitoring and evaluation at all stages. And I think Francis spoke about this quite a bit. And there are many linkages that happen, especially at high levels when we are planning, when we've heard of a crisis and we're planning our response. But the gap that's missing is usually the inclusion of local to that planning sector. Another part of empowerment, though, is what we're talking about in terms of accountability. So it comes to capacity building to ensure that local communities and local organizations can also meet the high standards that are expected of internationals, obviously in a different way, but the higher the standards that they can meet, then the more effective a role they can play. And once everybody is playing their role to the same extent, that leads to a higher standard of humanitarian action across the board. At ORAP, where I work, we work very closely with communities and we implement a lot of different donor projects, but the majority of our work is done at community level. So with or without donor funding, we spend a lot of time talking to communities and trying to understand them and trying to empower them to be a part of the planning and implementation and evaluation processes. And we found that in those situations, even communities that have been affected by floods in the past, when those same problems come up in the future, they are better able to deal with them because they have learned from their interaction with donor agencies. They have learned directly. Apart from being beneficiaries, they are also participants in the implementation. And so now they have their own early warning systems that they have developed and adjusted to their circumstances and to their resources. And they're able to better deal with the crises as they come up. And so just to end off, I just want to highlight that I think what's critical for humanitarian effectiveness is the empowerment and the inclusion of local communities. And this can happen in many different ways, whether it's the local government, whether it's community leaders or specific members of the community themselves. I think that they play a very big role in ensuring that humanitarian action is sustainable but also is effective and has a positive impact on the people who are affected. We found that there are agencies such as USAID in Zimbabwe has a very stringent policy of empowering local organizations, and do it a lot through non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations. And they're doing a lot of training, especially in sometimes in the administration of projects and planning projects, in analysis and in evaluations, to empower those organizations to be able to run by themselves firstly, but also to be able to deliver effective and high quality programs. So thank you for giving me this time, and I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion on those points. Thank you, Angrid.
Excellent, and thank you, Mvuselelo. I'm so sorry. I need to apologize. My screen temporarily I didn't have my information, so I wasn't able to properly introduce you from the start. And again, my apologies. But of course, as you mentioned yourself, Mvuselelo Huni is Chief Executive Officer of ORAP, standing for the Organization of Rural Associations for Progress, and has been with them for a number of years, 6 years I believe, and previously was in the private sector, and now also is involved as an advisor and a board member for a number of local organizations and companies in Zimbabwe. So a really interesting mix of experiences. And thank you so much, by the way, for tying in also the comments of our previous two speakers. Very much appreciate that, and really looking forward to coming back to you for more discussion in the Q&A section. So we're going to, yes, thank you very much. So we're going to move on to our next guest speaker, who is Rania El Rajji. I'm going to make sure I do have my information in front of me. So Rania is Humanitarian Affairs Advisor with Médecins Sans Frontières Spain. Rania has been specializing in human rights and working in this area since 2002 in different countries and continents. So hopefully we can hear again a bit of a comparative viewpoint. Rania having worked in the past in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Sudan, South Sudan, and in Ethiopia. So professional experience both inside and outside the sector that we're looking at today. So Rania, I think we have you on the line, and I'd like to give you the floor for your first comments.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Seems to be a bit of an echo. Let's try it once more. If you could try speaking once again.
I think because I'm both on the phone and the webinar.
Okay, just hold on for one moment there, Rania. We're going to make an adjustment on our side. And if you could talk through the phone rather than through the computer.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yes, that's perfect. You sound great, so I'm going to give you the floor now.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much and for having me, and this is a very interesting topic and a very interesting discussion. I'm going to be meeting Charles in a lot of what I'm going to say, unfortunately, but also from a bit of a different perspective, because as you know, Médecins Sans Frontières' mission is to respond to populations most affected by emergencies, basically emergencies of all kinds, be them conflicts or natural disasters. So from this perspective, we are mostly concerned with emergency humanitarian relief in East Africa, in the region. And we've been involved in various studies with country cases trying to look at ways of improving effectiveness of responding specifically to emergencies, cases such as South Sudan or other. First, I wanna say the obvious, which is that we often speak of the region, but the region is actually not homogeneous, because not only will we find very different contexts from one country to the other, even if affected by one disaster sometimes, but we will find that also the ability to respond and the vulnerability and the resilience of each region within the country will be different. So, it's a region that is, that comes under a number of conflicts, natural disasters, poverty, etc. But in order to speak of emergency, we first have to speak of the basic situation, which is, if you want, the infrastructure that exists in a number of countries across this region. Although it is different, but it is actually a great obstacle to a lot of the emergency response that takes place, because we have very dire security situation in a number of countries and contexts. We have the health living conditions, which are difficult to deal with. We have a large number of refugee and IDP flows, and we have very specific situations in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Somalia. We also have the medical realities for those who are most vulnerable, to the many disasters taking place, and access to healthcare services, including for people who are displaced and including for migrants. We have issues such as mother and child health challenges in a number of these countries. And we have, of course, countries with reduced access and countries with no access at all. So I can speak, for instance, from an MSF perspective that in the case of Eritrea, we have very little information on the exact situation in the country. And then we have a number of ongoing conflicts, and conflicts that have just started but don't seem anywhere near ending. So it's a very difficult context to be operating in. Some of the recommendations that are based on MSF's experience in order to try and at least minimize or reduce these obstacles and make better effectiveness of humanitarian response in these emergencies. One that we can think of first of all is that if we all agree that humanitarian assistance should be based on needs, then basically it is the needs that should be driving us to respond and not the realities of our operations. You can see in the case of South Sudan, for instance, when the conflict started, that there was a lot of difficulty, not even to reach, but to also know what the exact situation was of the most vulnerable population, where NGOs were not operating and where the conflict was the most acute. So part of this obstacle, removing it, is trying to assess our limits and trying to increase our capacities, but also our ability and willingness to go beyond our limits in the various operations in the countries where we are. This means understanding very well the risks, the security context, and being able to update it on a very regular basis. But it also means finding ways of engaging with the various actors who are operating in these countries. A number of countries in the region are what we refer to as assertive states or assertive actors, so people who would impede or limit our humanitarian access. So do we lock ourselves in our operations from a self-crisis perspective and say, okay, this is the limit of where we will go? Or shall we try and adapt and push our limits and engage with these variables? This means being very context specific, understanding the realities, understanding the specificities of each region within the countries we are operating in, having historical memory, and being able to adapt constantly and change the way we operate and the way we engage with these various actors. Another thing we can think of is basically the fact that often humanitarian assistance is unfortunately linked to political agendas. So one of our priorities as humanitarian actors should be pushing for political agendas to be dissociated from humanitarian assistance and not to determine humanitarian programming. So this is not only about the independence of humanitarian actors, but also giving them the priority and the space they need in order to facilitate the genuine humanitarian work and to have it as a priority rather than associated with other strategic objectives within our program. Another issue we also identify is that often the push for mandate approaches or resilient agendas means that on the ground the efforts are a bit dispersed. And as a result, this leads to a decrease in the capacity and the expertise to respond to emergencies. Hence, a great loss in emergency response capacity. So we need to refocus on emergency response and to build the capacity and the expertise that we need so that it is there when we need it. This also includes reflecting these priorities in terms of funding capacity. Another thing which, again, Charles touched on is the fact of working with governments to build national capacities in order to respond to emergencies, because, empowering them means that they rely less on external actors and that their ability to swiftly and effectively respond is bigger, but also at least they can play a role in managing the emergencies, and this is one that would definitely be a plus if they cannot respond themselves. In that regard, for instance, we can speak of the importance of leadership when it comes to emergencies. Of course, consensual and prioritized, but leadership at country level, because there is a need to make strategic decisions and often to make them very quickly. We can think of South Sudan or other contexts where the situation is so fluid and it's changing so quickly that we need to be able to follow up, to react, but also to reorient where we need to. And this level of leadership is needed in order to have that flexibility and ability to reply. We can also think of the fact that we need to be flexible in our operations, depending on the context we are operating in. We need to be able to think outside the box and not be afraid of operating with new non-traditional actors. You know, when we think of Somalia, for instance, Somalia is very specific in terms of the people we need to engage with, the clans, the various links. We need to understand these backgrounds, but we also need not to be afraid, of course, while exercising the caution. So we need to know very well our security, know very well our context. We need to be able to monitor, for instance, if we are running remote control operations, etc. But we need to have a certain level of flexibility and engagement with non-traditional actors. Another thing is that there is a need for a greater investment in building better systems. And when we talk of systems, we mean at national but also at global level. This means management, logistics, human resources, financing, but it also means trying to support the structures that should be there in terms of health structures. All of this would hopefully lead to an improved preparedness, response, and an improved effectiveness in our response. I will stop it there because I know I'm supposed to be short, and then we can answer queries as they come.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rania. A really fascinating presentation, and I'm sorry that we do have to end there because I think everyone was really appreciating your comments. So thanks so much again for being with us, and we look forward to coming back to you in the Q&A session. So now we're going to take a look at who we have on the line now. Okay, so Joseph, it looks like we can try to connect you. I hope it will work well. We'll give it a quick try here with my colleague Marcus.
Joseph, if you connected on your phone like you did before with the clicking on the microphone button, and then connect your microphone.
My mic, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well. And I'll just, I'll just
good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Joseph.
I'm not fluent in English. That's why my presentation is in French. Yeah.
Yes, it's no problem. And in fact, if you would like to give your presentation in French, that's very good. And we will provide a simultaneous translation through the chat into English. So you can proceed in French. I'll just briefly introduce you. Joseph is Executive Director of Hope Action International based in Kenya. So Joseph, we're very pleased to give you the floor.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. It's 14 working in humanitarian area with several organizations, and closely with the cluster the Hills cluster in Congo, and now I'm based in Kenya, working in emergency for Central and Eastern Africa. Yeah, as you can see, my presentation is in French. I need to present it directly. On va parler d'un seuil d'intervention harmonisé pour un des engagements sécurisés. Le cadre de coordination, c'est notre premier point que nous allons aborder, et celui-ci, c'est juste pour montrer ce qui s'est passé en 2006, la réforme humanitaire. Ceci qui conduit à une bonne coordination sur terrain des activités des différents partenaires. Ceci a pu organiser des clusters au niveau tant international, national, provincial, ainsi qu'au niveau local. Le cadre de coordination des chefs de mission aussi fait partie d'un des outils importants qui devraient être mis à profit des acteurs humanitaires. Il y a les réunions autour du cadre du gouvernement aussi qui devraient faciliter la coordination tout en gardant bien sûr la neutralité et l'impartialité en cas de conflit. Mais malgré cette réforme qui a commencé en 2006, il y a un certain nombre de faiblesses sur terrain que je ne serai pas étonné dans ma présentation ci-jointe, mais il y a une faiblesse qui a totalement attiré mon attention, et c'est la faiblesse des acteurs humanitaires dans le cadre d'harmonisation de seuil d'intervention. Il existe des acteurs humanitaires qui ne s'inscrivent pas cependant dans ce cadre formel de coordination. Ces acteurs ont leurs outils qui des fois ne sont pas harmonisés avec les autres partenaires. Les autres acteurs entrent sur le terrain sans présenter leurs apports au sein des cadres de coordination pour harmonisation. Il y a des outils que les clusters mettent en place qui ne sont pas nécessairement acceptés par tous quand les uns considèrent pour les uns qui se considèrent comme des observateurs. Alors, en ce point, vous allez trouver que ce n'est pas tout le monde qui participe dans les réunions de clusters qui est nécessairement membre effectif de ce cluster. Et ici, ça crée une certaine faiblesse dans les interventions. Et si nous allons parler des éléments de coordination harmonisés, il y a la répartition géographique des acteurs, il y a la répartition des rôles entre acteurs, gouvernement, agences des Nations Unies, ONG internationales, ONG locales, les acteurs indépendants, entre autres la Fédération internationale de la Croix-Rouge, les Médecins sans frontières, il y a la Croix-Rouge internationale, Crescent, etc., etc. Donc, tous ces partenaires ici, vous allez trouver qu'ils ne sont pas directement impliqués comme membres effectifs de cluster, mais ils agissent bien, très bien sur le terrain, avec une très grande expérience. Mais ici, venant se joindre aux communautés locales et au secteur privé aussi, qui jouent un grand rôle. Il y a aussi le paquet minimum d'intervention qui est partagé entre les acteurs. Il y a l'entrée et la sortie des acteurs sur le terrain et les liens entre les urgences et le développement. Si nous devons parler de l'entrée et la sortie des acteurs, l'entrée et la sortie de chaque acteur devraient absolument être bien présentées aux autres acteurs pour harmonisation. Les cadres de coordination formelle ne devraient pas faire des exceptions. les seuils d'intervention des acteurs non impliqués formellement dans ce cadre de coordination devraient être connus par d'autres acteurs et au besoin discutés d'avance sur base de cas précis. En avançant ici, je veux dire à la communauté humanitaire qu'il y a un problème de seuil d'intervention. Comment? Il existe des acteurs ayant leur propre seuil d'intervention, à part celui de ces différents clusters. Ce qui est normal, indéniable. Vu la limite des ressources, des acteurs devraient connaître qui vient faire quoi, où, quand il pourra le faire et comment il va le faire. Quelles sont ses capacités techniques sur terrain, ses capacités financières et aussi connaître ces acteurs sur terrain nécessairement, présenter leur seuil d'intervention et leurs objectifs à atteindre avant la sortie ou le désengagement. Ici, nous allons parler d'une petite étude de cas qui est un cas de lutte contre le choléra comme une activité d'urgence. Vous allez trouver des acteurs qui se présentent sur terrain et un des acteurs intervenants ne pourra intervenir que quand il y a déjà 20 cas, selon son seuil d'intervention. Celui-ci, pour le désengagement aussi, il est prêt à se désengager dès qu'il arrive à 10 cas la semaine. Ici, il se pose un problème. Le problème qui se pose, c'est quoi exactement? Qui est supposé intervenir dès qu'on a un cas ou dès qu'on arrive à 19 cas? Entre le premier cas et le 19e cas, qui est supposé intervenir? Et là, c'est à l'entrée, c'est le début des activités d'urgence. Mais maintenant, vu son seuil d'intervention, à partir du 10e, quand il se retrouve avec la semaine, il est de se désengager. Là aussi, il y a une question qui se pose. Dès le 10e cas jusqu'à 0 cas, qui prend la relève? Est-ce que les autres acteurs doivent rester bras croisés au début de l'épidémie? Comment est gérée la sortie de celui-ci en tant que partenaire? Ce sont des questions qu'on se pose, mais qui ne sauraient faire la revue des seuils d'intervention de chaque partenaire. Sans condamner ceux-là qui ont leur seuil d'intervention propre et qui ne seraient pas bougés, nous voulons ici dire aux acteurs humanitaires qu'il serait utile que ces acteurs aient la possibilité d'être flexibles pour faciliter l'intervention. Et on se pose encore une fois une question, les autres acteurs viendront-ils faire le relais sans préparation préalable? Au 10e cas, le nouvel acteur a-t-il les ressources nécessaires pour parvenir à intervenir? À partir de moins de 10 cas, l'accueil de l'épidémie s'annonce, mais cela ne signifie pas qu'une flambée ne puisse plus s'improviser et embarrasser la communauté humanitaire. La gestion de l'accueil de l'épidémie reste le début de la sécurisation des communautés locales après le désengagement. Cela veut dire que nous devons à tout prix se rassurer que nous sécurisons les communautés locales pour ne plus revenir dans la même crise après notre départ. C'est là que, parlant du seuil d'intervention harmonisé, nous allons dire que les acteurs devraient harmoniser leur entrée et leur sortie pour un éventuel désengagement, sécurisant les bénéficiaires qui restent derrière ces acteurs. Les mêmes acteurs devraient se rassurer que la résilience communautaire sera assurée après leur sortie. Ceux-ci devraient s'engager dans la résilience communautaire si possible. Mais la répartition des rôles entre les acteurs faciliterait cette tâche. En conclusion, nous voulons dire ceci. Sur terrain, les agences des Nations Unies, les ONG internationales, les ONG locales et le gouvernement devraient harmoniser le seuil d'intervention commun et relativement selon les normes de chaque acteur. Il faut se rassurer du renforcement des capacités des acteurs locaux avant la sortie et au besoin du début à la fin de l'intervention. Il faut absolument éviter les slogans selon lesquels le gouvernement doit maintenant jouer son rôle, car cela n'est pas toujours évident. Ce n'est pas nécessairement, puisque nous sommes à la fin d'une crise, que le gouvernement a maintenant les capacités nécessaires pour rester gérer la résilience communautaire. D'où il faut créer un cadre de concertation avec les acteurs de développement. Ça veut dire les acteurs humanitaires et les acteurs de développement devraient absolument travailler de commun accord ensemble avec un certain cadre de coordination, surtout quand on commence à atterrir avec la crise, pour que ceci puisse faire un bon relais sur terrain. Je dis et je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Merci, Joseph. Thank you very much. And I hope that those of you who are not Francophone were able to follow well with the assistance of my colleague who was writing in the notes. Joseph, we do have several questions that came in for you during your presentation, so we'll try to come back to you in just a few minutes. But before we do, we'll have one more presentation. I hope that we have Filipa on the line. Filipa would like to turn to. So we'll just make sure that's working.
Hello.
Yes, excellent. Yes, very good. It's a little bit quiet. If you could try speaking a little bit louder.
Hello.
Yes, that's very good. So Filipa, I'd like to introduce you very briefly here. Filipa is a program officer with the UNFPA and Gender Focal Point for the Protection Cluster, and Filipa is based in Mozambique, from where she is joining the conversation today. So Filipa, we're very interested to hear your views on the regional priorities in terms of this. So I'll give you the floor.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Hangaga. Most of my issues have been raised by the colleagues, but I would like to highlight 2 or 3 points, specifically in relation to building resilience, because in recurrent major situation in a country like Mozambique, the resilience part is very, very, very important, because the community will keep going with the coping mechanism. So if there is no addressing of these specific needs, then we will keep going like with the humanitarian situation every year. And also another issue which I would like to highlight is to focus on local specificity. For example, for very young population, for the country with very young population, with gender imbalances, high HIV prevalence communities, then if the humanitarian response does not address these issues, we will not respond very effectively. Adding to this, if the there are already weakness with the provision of basic services by the government, then the humanitarian response will not be. So this is this can be the highlight, to take into consideration that before the crisis, the countries, some of those countries are already facing very big problems on service delivery. So that's one thing to highlight. And I think the humanitarian community should focus on collaboration and strengthening coordination mechanisms to avoid competition among the organizations. And I also think building linkage between the recovery phase and the development without creating dependence of the government itself and the community, it will be very, very, very important. And as I heard from some of our speakers, learn from local community coping mechanism will reinforce our strategies on humanitarian response. I think these are the main issues I would like to highlight in this afternoon's session. If there is any response, I can question, I can add on. Hello.
Yes, thank you very much, Filipa. Thank you very much for your comments and for bringing in the points that you've seen in your work as the priorities in this area for the region. I think there's a lot of resonance, a lot of agreements among the participants here in the room, and you really bring up a number of important points for all of us and everybody working in the region. So thank you for that. So we've had a remarkably active conversation going both with the presentations that we've had. Also, I've been just amazed by the richness of the discussion that we have going on in the chat and also through the questions. So thank you very much to all of you for your activity there and your inputs. We're running a little bit low on time. So we're going to try to be a little bit unconventional and make sure that we can still hear once more from each one of our guest speakers, but we will have to move quite quickly through this. So we have a few specific questions that have come through, and I'll be going through the roster of our speakers here, and I'll ask each one of you a specific question and possibly also a general question. And if you also have any additional final comments or remarks, reflections that you would like to make, please do so at that time, because I'm afraid we'll only have time for one round to go through our panel. So we're going to begin with Michael. And now, Michael, your presentation, it inspired a number of questions. I saw here you were looking in particular at chronic or protracted crises. You're looking at cyclical crises, funding structures, and we have a couple of questions that came in during your presentation. One question from Marisa. She was wondering, in your opinion or in your experience, what would you consider to be a timely response? So this is a term that's often brought up, particularly in the around effectiveness, but what for you is a timely response, Michael? And then a second question, this is from Thabo in Zimbabwe, and Thabo is he's pointing to a phenomenon what she's calling pseudo-engagement, which I think, Michael, you can interpret as you will, but the question is, what measures are in place to minimize, quote, pseudo-engagement, which has negatively impacted on building the capacities at the local level, building future capacities. So this might be maybe engagement that doesn't go deep enough, or is not extended enough over time, or in other ways is not effective engagement. So if you have any reflections on that question and or the previous one, Michael, you're very welcome to comment. I think one additional question, and this will be a general one for all of our speakers, is what are some of the best examples you've seen of empowerment or improved inclusion of domestic institutions in humanitarian response? Several have been mentioned, but also what are the barriers to this higher level of empowerment or inclusion? Why is this a problem? Why is this not happening enough? So Michael, I'll give you the floor now.
Okay, thank you very much. To answer the question of timely response and what is meant by that. First of all, before a disaster occurs, there's something we call early warning, early action. So even before the disaster is there, I think it is left for the local organizations, the community members, to start preparing for those higher grounds, to start preparing for the relocation, to start preparing to make sure that the stocks are in place so that people can get relief on a timely basis. So even before disaster strikes, there are activities we do. Now, when it comes to timely response, we look at, and our figures is between 24 to 48, maximum 72 hours. And the premise is that we need to get the needed items to the needed people on a timely manner. And what is that timely manner? If they don't, if you give them blankets 2 weeks after the flood, or you give them mosquito nets 2 weeks after the flood, we're not timely. We need to give it to them when it is most needed. And for us, we define it as maximum 72 hours after the event strikes. So early warning is critical. Early action is critical. We need to make sure that we have our systems in place to be able to respond. In terms of pseudo engagement, what does that mean, and capacity building? I mean, for me and from the experience we have, you know, what some of us humanitarian actors do is we think capacity building is just a one-off event. So we go there, we train them for 2, 3, 4 days, and then that's it, we turn our backs. But it's a process. It's a process that we need to constantly engage, you know, people at the local level in, so that at least by the time we train them, get them into the fields, continue the peer-to-peer support, I think we will be able to see results more. So basically, what we do from the Red Cross is that in the past we thought capacity building was bringing, you know, 2 people from a country to the regional workshop and just train those 2 people. We've moved away from that. And as I said, it's a process. We rather go down to the communities or to the country and train more people, so that when people leave the institution, leave the organizations, that capacity building aspect still remains within the different institutions and organizations. So I think, again, what happens in terms of capacity building is that we don't necessarily adapt it to the local context. And I think as humanitarian actors, we need to take a step back and listen and hear what is the local context. How can we ensure that this capacity building that we are doing is really geared towards the local context? And more we're starting to see that, you know, we really need to listen to the community members. They have processes in place that they've been following for centuries, and we sort of come in and start, you know, dispelling those processes and saying, no, our own system works. We need to listen to them and see how we can complement each other's initiatives by listening to them. Maybe a final note from me before I give up the floor is, I think if we're serious about humanitarian effectiveness, we need to ensure that our local organizations are capacitated. And as I said, capacity building is not a one-stop thing. It's a process that we need to constantly engage in. And it goes right across to governance, to accountability, to transparency, to ensuring that we have the early warning, early action systems in place, and so on. So building the capacity of the local organizations is critical, empowering them is critical, and we need to train them to also be able to raise resources locally and to make sure that there's that culture of corporate giving, or there's that culture of giving within the local context. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael, and thanks so much for being with us. I know you have to run now to facilitate another event of your own, so we really appreciate your time, and thanks again for all of your valuable comments and contributions. So we're going to be moving. Great, thank you. So we're going to be turning next to Mvuselelo, and again we have a couple of questions here. So first, we have a question coming in inspired by your remarks, Mvuselelo. The question is, if we're going to include children, women, and the disabled more in the planning of humanitarian response, to give more of to these groups, as you were mentioning, should there actually be more of a humanitarian effort on changing local stigmas? Or would that effort be actually beyond the scope of humanitarian response and should be taken up on another track? So Mvuselelo, that's a specific question for you. And then we would also like to pose the more general question. You actually mentioned an example of, a good example of empowerment, inclusion of domestic institutions. You mentioned the work of USAID and got into some examples there. Do you have any other specific examples that you would highlight? And in addition, what would you point to as some of the barriers to empowering local organizations, and some explanation or some theory from your side as to why this is not happening enough? So I'll give the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ingrid. To answer the first question about reducing stigma, I think that humanitarian action must always be a coordinated approach. One of the conversations on the chat was about coordinating humanitarian work together with development work, and how all actors need to make sure that we're building resilience so that humanitarian work can move across to development. So I think that in terms of humanitarian work, our aim is to save lives and to improve people's lives. So I think reducing stigma and educating people on the different aspects of the people in their communities is very important. I don't think that it can easily be removed from that. So my simple answer to that would be yes. And in some cases, it may not be the expertise of the particular organization that's implementing at the time, and that's where collaboration comes in, to make sure that the people who are best at doing that and educating communities about stigma in order to reduce it are able to do that, to help them to do that. On the more general questions, some other examples of inclusion, I think in terms of inclusion of local communities, where development work has been going on for some time, and you see local or community organizations actually coming up to a national level where they are able to showcase their work, and they're able to encourage and to mentor other local community organizations. We have an international trade fair that happens every year, and there are many community groups that have been assisted by various development and humanitarian NGOs to implement livelihood activities or income-generating activities. And when you meet them at the trade fair, they are on an international stage where they are showcasing their work, and they are highlighting the efforts that they have put together to produce what's often a very tangible result. But what the key thing will be doing is to encourage other groups to be able to interact with different actors at different levels. What I think are some of the barriers to the inclusion of local organizations, I think, is communication. They often don't have the platform to engage the international donors and to engage the Kenyan agencies to be able to give their voice, or to give the voice to the communities in those spheres. I think there's also a challenge of actual or even perceived capacity. that some of the requirements that are there for participating on an international stage, a lot of local organizations cannot meet at that level. So I agree with Michael that capacity building is very, very important, but it has to understand the actual capacities, but to bring the organization up to the international level or to the standard that is required in terms of interacting with donors and other international organizations. And just to end off my final remark is to say that I believe that it's never too late to start community engagement. It doesn't have to be a very formal process, but just for organizations that are already working with communities, it's a conversation. It's opening up the discussions for those staff who are at field level to talk to their beneficiaries, to talk to the people that they're working with, to try and understand them from that level. And from there to build formal processes of inclusion and dialogue and including the comments and the thoughts of the communities into the action, into the planning and the implementation or the evaluation of the action. But I believe that it's an action that can start at any point and one that continues throughout, and that it plays such a big role in sustainability and in resilience as well. Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you very much for that, Mvuselelo. So just a quick note of apology to everyone. We are running a little bit over time, but we do want to make sure that we can hear again from each one of our speakers, because we've had so many excellent questions come in. So thanks all of you for being with us and going with it over time. So we're going to be turning next to Rania. And Rania, I wanted to ask you, I hope that you were able to hear the presentation of Joseph, or possibly to see the chat or see the transcript that was being made, but hopefully to hear it as well. And I wondered what would be your reaction. So coming from the context of working with Médecins Sans Frontières, and then hearing the comments of Joseph regarding coordination, and particularly some of the challenges regarding coordinating the entry and exit strategies. So he was looking at case studies with different thresholds of crises, and looking at the need for coordination, harmonization to help coordinate the entry and exit of different organizations to respond at different levels. I'm interested, and I think several other participants have been asking as well, what might be the view of someone working from the MSF Médecins Sans Frontières context. So we'd like to hear from you on that. And then the second question, again, the general question regarding empowerment or inclusion of domestic institutions. This has been, as we've seen today, a major theme from almost everybody making their comments in this event today. And actually it was for both of the previous regional events, both Western Africa and North and Southeast Asia, a major recommendation coming out of the formal consultations. So along that line, what would you see are some of the examples, the positive examples of greater empowerment or inclusion of domestic institutions, but also what would you see are some of the barriers, or maybe even some of the situations in which it's not in the role of humanitarian response to necessarily focus first and foremost on local empowerment, but that's possibly another priority. So what are your views on the empowerment of local organizations question? Over to you, Rania.
Can you hear me right?
You're a little bit quiet, but we're just raising the volume now. Could you try again?
Sure. Is this better?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll be very quick. I actually didn't, because I had a bad connection, so please correct me if I'm diverting, because I didn't hear the discussion specifically on this. But basically, in relation to entry and exit strategies and in relation to coordination specifically, well, it's not a secret, so I'm going to call it as it is. I mean, you know, MSF operates often, or is seen sometimes as a loner in terms of its operations, because, well, it's an emergency response NGO, and it often tries to cross the lines, if I may say so, or to try to really get to people in a maybe unconventional way, and there has been some decisions. For instance, MSF is not part of the cluster groups. There are some very specific particularities to MSF. However, when it comes to coordination, what I want to say is that, while there might be specific reasons for one NGO or the other in an emergency context to operate as such, because they want to make sure that the resources, time, etc., is 100% diverted towards their action on the ground. However, when we touch on issues of coordination, then we are touching on issues of leadership, we are touching on issues of complementarity, and we are touching on issues of not duplicating our activities and making sure that we all basically serve the same objective. So the importance of coordination comes from that. And organizations such as MSF, which at times will operate outside of the cluster system, etc., will still, however, need this kind of complementarity, because especially in context in the region, we have found out that being able to engage with assertive actors, being able to coordinate your message, to speak with a strong voice, to have a better access, you need to actually coordinate your messaging and your operations sometimes with NGOs, agencies that do not have the same way of operating as you do. So this entry and exit strategy, I would say, in my personal capacity, from what I have seen with MSF and other agencies, that it is really an umbrella that we all fall under at some point in our operations. To come back to your second question, which is regarding domestic institutions, it's a very difficult case, because it's definitely, we can speak of several examples in very different and very difficult contexts sometimes, Darfur, other contexts where building these domestic institutions is actually, to an extent, part of the resilience that you have. So part of the ability of the communities to respond to whatever is going on, but also the national institutions and the local institutions. We have seen, for instance, as MSF, we've worked a lot in Darfur with the Ministry of Health, because they are not only an entry point to many areas, but they are also, they have the mandate that we do not have, and they have the capacity to enter places and to respond to certain crises. So there are, of course, several layers. There is always a security, a political dimension in all operations in conflict or difficult contexts, let me say. But however, going through these local institutions is often a key point to entering areas that are most vulnerable. And so MSF has worked a lot and relied a lot on these Ministry of Health structures, these local structures, in order to be able to do interventions. Something that does not touch on this specifically, but that I always think of as, a good example of how, at the end of the day, it is the governments that are able to respond to emergencies best. I think of a recent case example, which is the Ebola crisis, and how so many capacities have been pulled towards responding to Ebola emergency. And what we saw is that for many various reasons I won't enter into right now, but for instance in the case of Nigeria, we saw that if you are able to operate an early detection system and you are able to pour all of your energy into that, and the skills that you have, which in the case of the country might be your military, for instance, or your ability to organize yourself, then you will still be able to produce some output, and you will still be able to stop a growing crisis, even if you are seen as a country which cannot respond to emergencies. So I'll stop it there, and just let me know if you have any further questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that, Rania. And now, Joseph, we will be turning to you, and I hope that you don't mind if I will pose one question in French and in English. So I hope that won't be okay. I hope that won't be too much of a problem. Before I questions, I'd like to suggest that we just check your audio connection to make sure it's still there. Joseph, can we make a quick check?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, yes. Okay, yes, we hear you very well. Good. So we have two questions. So the first from Sonia. She asks, Joseph, avez-vous déjà eu l'occasion sur le terrain de faire part de vos remarques à MSF, Médecins sans frontières, qui, comme vous l'avez indiqué, ne souhaite pas faire partie du système des clusters? It's question one. And then we have a second question for you, Joseph. You mentioned NGO withdrawal, NGO exit strategy. A question from Marisa. Who should be involved in determining the NGO withdrawal? Who should be in charge of managing that timeline of the NGO withdrawal? So over to you, Joseph.
Thank
Joseph,
you very much for the
yes,
questions.
if you'd like to respond in French, en français, it's totally fine. We make a translation, so as you prefer.
D'accord. Merci beaucoup. Ok, mon intervention ne s'adresse pas nécessairement à MSF, ça c'est juste sous forme de correction. Je voulais juste, j'ai épinglé le cas de choléra et des maladies, des épidémies, puisque j'ai plus travaillé avec le cluster santé depuis la réforme humanitaire jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Et j'ai remarqué qu'il y a un nombre d'acteurs très importants, puisque si on peut citer les acteurs les plus importants dans la santé, il y a MSF qui est une référence. Mais ces mêmes acteurs qui sont les plus importants, ils sont dans le cluster comme des observateurs. C'est là que, pour moi, j'estime qu'il serait très important qu'il y ait une harmonisation, que ce soit au niveau global, national et local, entre ces acteurs qui restent observateurs au sein des clusters. Pourquoi? Puisque cela permettrait à ce qu'il y ait une très bonne harmonisation de l'entrée et sortie et de la réponse sur terrain. J'ai été sur terrain dans la lutte contre le choléra au Congo, dans la santé, la logistique médicale. On a quelques éléments, mais si vous essayez de jeter un coup d'œil sur la politique d'entrée et sortie des acteurs, vous allez remarquer qu'il y en a qui ont un seuil qui nécessairement ne répond pas ou qui en question un certain nombre d'acteurs qui se demandent qui agit quand, comment et où. C'est quand je vous dis un acteur qui sort sur terrain après avoir soigné des milliers ou des centaines de malades et qui laisse la situation dans les 10 cas, 6 cas, 5 cas, c'est une maladie infectieuse qui peut encore une fois régénérer. Un seul cas suffit pour toucher d'autres 20 ou 30 personnes, selon les familles, selon la proximité. Et là, je me dis, ce sont des questions très importantes qu'il faudrait voir. Alors, vous avez aussi parlé du cadre de la coordination. Je pense que c'est votre deuxième question.
Yes, the other question, l'autre question, yes, regarding the NGO withdrawal, the exit strategy, who should, yes, so who should be ultimately responsible for coordinating, for determining the time and the means of the withdrawal, at what level of authority in the system?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, dans mon intervention, vous allez remarquer que j'ai épinglé les cadres de coordination reconnus au niveau national. Et là, on retrouve la coordination assurée par OCHA à travers les clusters. Et il y a une coordination des chefs de mission des ONG qui n'est pas nécessairement une coordination formelle. Mais dans tout cela, nous travaillons toujours autour des gouvernements. Ce sont les gouvernements qui nous permettent d'entrer sur le terrain, travailler avec eux. Nous venons pour les soutenir, bien que nous gardons notre neutralité politique sur le terrain. Cela veut dire que les clusters devraient bien jouer ce rôle de coordination. Nous parvenons à voir quel acteur vient pour faire quoi durant quelle période sur le terrain. C'est inconcevable qu'il y ait des acteurs qui rentrent sur le terrain, qui viennent faire le travail, bien qu'ayant la technique nécessaire et les ressources, c'est très bien, mais qui ne parviennent pas à harmoniser avec les autres. On a vu sur le terrain des acteurs qui se retirent à un certain niveau, et là, je me dis, le gouvernement devrait absolument avoir un agenda clair sur qui vient pour faire quoi, durant quel moment. Pour répondre directement à votre question, j'estime que le gouvernement devrait jouer son rôle à ce niveau et les clusters lead devraient absolument se rassurer que cette coordination est bien faite sur le terrain. Voilà.
Okay, excellent. Merci beaucoup, Joseph. Thank you very much. Very much appreciate your inputs on both of those questions. And thank you for being with us. It's been really a pleasure to have you on our panel. So we're going to be moving. Thank you. So we'll move next to Filipa, and finally we'll go to Francis. So next, moving to Filipa, who again is working with the UNFPA in Mozambique. But you mentioned, you emphasized very much in your presentation the strengthening of local capacity and also the focus on local specificity. And I think it would be interesting for everybody to hear from you some examples that you might have, specific examples from your experience working in Mozambique of situations where there was successful strengthening of local capacity. What has worked the best in your view, in your experience, and also if you've observed any of the barriers. Again, we've had some mentioned by other speakers, but in the particular context of Mozambique where you're working, what have you seen as some of the barriers or the reasons why local capacity is not being strengthened enough so far in the humanitarian response? So over to you, Filipa.
Okay, thank you again. I will use some of last year's floods in southern Mozambique as an example, whereby 3 provinces, which one of them which has the highest HIV prevalence rate. At the same time, we were struggling with the humanitarian response in relation to giving people protection, food, shelter, but the whole health system was disrupted, and people wanted to continue. Some of them with their treatment, and for the young people, special, the prevention program stopped. So this was a very challenging issue, because people moved from one place to another, whereby they could not continue their daily life. So coordinating and connecting with the local institutions, with local or community-based organization was very important, in order to identify where the people who need this kind of support, or the people, or the young people who needs counseling or prevention activity. So I think it was, for some time, the humanitarian community succeeded, but at the same time, we feel that the local community also itself was overwhelmed with the disaster. Just to give an example, one of those people, when they are affected, they move from their places, and so they go to the safe places where they have relatives. So those families may become overwhelmed with receiving more and more people coming from the affected area. So I think it's very important to make this connection between our work and what should we give to the local institution, in order for them to deliver assistance to the people. Because when they know that these people are the ones who on daily work, they work with us, it's more easier for them to make the connect and to access the services. And this is, most of the time, this is challenging, because some of these local institutions, local organizations, they do not have sufficient capacity to respond to big humanitarian crisis. So it is up to us to rethink how do we strengthen this local organization in order to succeed.
Excellent. Thank you, Filipa, and thank you so much for your time today and for being with us. So now, thank you very much. So we're going to move now to Francis. Francis, you're going to be getting here today. So thank you for your patience. I appreciate your still being here, although we're now almost half an hour over time. But as you've all seen, it's been a great discussion, and we would hate to cut things short. So, Francis, we'd like to come back to you, and you really got us started with the discussion today, looking at who is involved and at what levels in humanitarian response. You mentioned taking lessons on increasing the focus of volunteerism, taking lessons from other regions, building a stronger culture of volunteerism. You were also talking about youth involvement. And in fact, you inspired quite a lengthy discussion in the chat I saw on the question of what age range is considered youth. So that was a question that came in from one of our other guests, Mvuselelo. And Francis, I'd like to ask if you have any input on that question, and I hope you were able to follow the discussion in the chat as well about the implications that stem from how that term youth is defined, and also the distinction between youth and children, particularly when we talk about the planning of an implementation of humanitarian response. So that would be the specific question for you, Francis, on the term youth and its implications. And then the second, as I've been asking everybody, because this theme of empowerment, engagement, involvement of domestic institutions, local institutions is such an important one. Clearly, it would be interesting to hear from you, Francis, about any specific positive examples that you've seen of increased empowerment, increased engagement of this kind. And then also the tough question, but I think a really important one if we're going to be serious about this issue, is what are the barriers? Why is this a problem? So of course it's pointed out as a gap, but why have we gotten to this point? What are the barriers and some of the real challenges related to greater involvement of domestic institutions? So over to you, Francis, for the last word.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate also the contribution by other presenters and everyone on this platform. I think it's very much enriching. Very quickly, because of time, as you've indicated, I will start by your last question on local capacity. One of the things that I would wish also the speakers and everyone listening and humanitarian community, one of the things we need to do is we need to demystify what capacity building is all about. I would give you an example. For instance, between 2011 and 2011, when Uganda, eastern part of Uganda, experienced a disaster in a place called Bududa along Mount Elgon. One of the studies around the evaluation of the outcomes indicated that there was no basic statistics showing the number of people located where in the household. And that was really a problem, because during rescue, they could not be able to know how many people have they rescued and how many people have been buried. So, and it means that even if the Red Cross and the military and other institutions would have been of help, it would have been difficult, because then we have not done groundwork to provide support to local community or national government so that they can strengthen their institutions, such as the Bureau of Statistics. So that is one of the areas that different humanitarian agencies with the different expertise can also support national governments and local institutions. And in one way or another, that is also answering the question on challenges and barriers. But also at a policy level, in terms of barriers, I think one of the things that moving forward humanitarian institutions would want to do in coming days is to find a balance between, supporting governments and being in a position to understand that the politics, as I had already said, the politics of the day should not be a barrier, but we should be able to make use of the political environment to enhance the capacity of local institutions. And I would give you an example. For instance, in this time when regional, there is a lot of regionalization, there are a lot of calls for humanitarian agencies to support, for instance, the exercises that are going around. Now, that would be an opportunity, one, to support, to provide technical expertise to this platform, the military platform that is going on. Two, it would also be an opportunity for the humanitarian agencies also to learn how the military work in operation, and therefore, how then do we exploit that opportunity moving forward. But coming back also to your question in regard to who is a youth, I think it is context specific. What I meant is that a group of people who would be able to, we need to institutionalize the engagement of young people. It doesn't matter whatever age, but I think international standards have defined who a youth is. In many countries, you will find between 18 to 35 years old, but it has to be very systematic, because it is one value. You are trying to transfer the value of voluntarism at a very tender age, perhaps young people who are in their early or advanced grades, to when they are at the age of working, you now introduce the practice of volunteerism. That is enhancing that in those two levels, in terms of transfer of knowledge and values at a tender age, but more importantly, as they grow, you can also engage them because they are available, they have the skills, and they're also willing to support their community. And that is how to build resilience. Resilience can also be built through such engagement or such kind of platform. So it's not about the age of the youth, but I think it's about strengthening institutions, as colleagues have said, and making sure that the process starts at a tender age, going through to the older age, to the later age, where they are now actively involved in voluntary work, either in rescuing people, in providing the manpower, in building resilience, or generally preventing occurrence of such kind of disasters. And where it occurs, they can also provide the workforce. And then finally, in terms of local communities involvement, I think one of the things that we need to, and many colleagues have alluded to, doing our planning within the local context. That has always been the problem. For me, this is a missed opportunity in many regions, South Africa and Eastern Africa, and we have very good examples across the regions which allude to that. Another thing, finally, that I would also want us to bring to our attention, which was also mentioned, I think, by one of the colleagues, either Charles or Joseph, is handling small-scale disasters. One, because the small-scale disasters don't attract international media, and therefore the risk is they are not likely to receive the support, either financial support or technical support, for them to move forward in terms of preventing or mitigation. And therefore, I would suggest that in our programming, in our publicity, in our advocacy, in both regions, we need to increase the visibility of small-scale disasters. And as we do that, I think we are okay to move forward and provide solutions. And then maybe developing standard operating procedures.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Francis, and a pleasure to have you with us today. Thanks to all of you. I'm going to wrap things up quickly now. I think this has been a record length discussion, but I have to say we have no regrets. I think we have a lot of great input here, and I, for one, am really looking forward to seeing the report from this event. I noticed that I think it was Dudone or somebody else in the chat was feeling the same way I felt, a bit overwhelmed by so much information coming on different channels, but it's great, and we'll be able to put that all together in the report for you. So with that, I'd like to quickly wrap things up here, and of course, as always, invite all of you to join the ongoing discussion on the World Humanitarian Summit consultations, specifically the theme of effectiveness, and you can do that via the worldhumanitariansummit.org website. And of course, as we move on to additional regions here at PHAP, we hope to be able to bring you more live online discussions as well in cooperation with the Summit Secretariat. So with that, I'd like to once again thank all of you as participants, to thank our guest speakers. It's been great having all of you with us. Francis, Michael, Mvuselelo, Rania, Joseph, Filipa, great to have all of you. And also a big thanks to our team here at PHAP for putting everything together. We couldn't do it without you. So big thanks to all of you, and I'll sign off now from Geneva. This is Anherad Lang signing off from PHAP. Goodbye for now.